Welcome to your number one source for technological innovations, ideas, and strategies for your business. Multiply your business's equations and put the odds in your favor. Now, live from Club IT HQ with your hosts, Ben and Sam. This is Tech Factor.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Ben.
And I'm Sam.
And this is
The Tech Factor.
The Tech Factor. Right, so we're at episode 7 for The Tech Factor. This is a podcast about driving businesses' productivity and innovation utilizing technology. Today we're going to talk about something which gets talked about a lot actually, was sort of the internal IT versus outsourcing through something like a managed services provider. So when does it make sense to hire internally and when should you outsource? So it's an interesting discussion, and as your business grows and IT starts to become a major part of your operations, it's often time to think about, okay, well, what level of IT resource do we need or should we have internally, and what should we be outsourcing or having to running it with a managed service provider. So there are different ways to go about this, and honestly, and we'll get to the conclusion later on, but some businesses have an approach where they just go, right, we're going to have a completely internal IT group of like a management structure and an internal IT staff, and have their own little department. And others will completely outsource the entire lot. And there isn't, depending on your business's circumstances, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to that. Although I will say that those that have completely internal IT departments still, you'll often see they'll outsource projects and specific work just because of the specialized nature of IT.
Comes down to an expertise thing, that one.
That's right, because the thing is, it's very hard for one person or even a couple of people to be experts at everything. So it's you still need to bring in external help from time to time, regardless of whichever model you end up using. But we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons today, and we're going to start off with basically the pros and cons on the MSP side. So Sam, let's see, we've got a few notes there. So you want to kick it off and go into some of the pros and cons?
So I suppose one of our main ones you're going to talk about was something that we've already touched on in just the last 30 seconds is going to be your expertise. So this is going to be one of those pros and cons where if you've got in-house IT, the con of that is that, you might have even a team of 10 people if you're a large organization, and you can't expect them to all be experts at absolutely everything. Each team member will have their own pros and cons on what their strengths and weaknesses are and what they've had experience in. And that's where you're going to see as a pro from a managed service provider, because a managed service provider is going to have a lot more experience and expertise on a range of different subjects compared to internal IT. And that's probably your main one you're going to look at is how broad your IT department needs to be.
It is a really important point, right? Because one of the things that we constantly, I guess, in what we call the MSP space, we're dealing with all kinds of varieties of issues every single day across a range of different businesses, right? So if you're in the same business, it is possible for things to get a little bit monotonous and to sort of get stuck in sort of, okay, this is the little ecosystem that we're dealing with, and you manage that ecosystem, and certainly there are definitely advantages to that, knowing a system inside out and having that little bit of extra speciality in that. But on the same note, it does limit your the variety of things that you're exposed to, right? So when you come across things that maybe you're not familiar with, you may end up in a situation where you might have trouble sort of figuring out an issue because, again, you're not exposed to a vast variety of issues. So having that little bit of extra exposure in a managed services environment does actually, and it's a little bit faster paced than internal IT. So certainly that is advantageous. But one of the things as well, particularly with what we do at Club IT, because we specialise in a number of key industries, and this is one of the things actually that conversely I've seen some counter arguments with internal IT as well, because we specialise. Say for example, the clubs industry, right? We look after a range of different clubs, and the main advantage that we get with that is that we see really what works and what doesn't work. There's a lot of things that we see, across the clubs industry, and we learn stuff, right? So we see something in a club and go, oh, that works quite well, and we'll adopt that at another club. So we utilize the shared knowledge of that industry to actually build better solutions for every individual client. So when we find something that works well in one particular club, we'll often share that knowledge with the other club, and we'll utilize that to build on to their systems. And that's not something you're going to get having a completely internal approach. It may be something you may benefit out of with a hybrid approach as well. So, but that is probably one of the key differences that often stands out to me with sort of the internal and the versus external outsourced approach. But and in saying that, as I said, it's important to point out it's not an either or. Like I see often some people get a little bit defensive about it. Like both internal IT. I see that I hear stories about internal IT going, oh, the outsourced guys, they just want to turn a profit. They don't care. They just want to try and make as much money as possible. They want to make us fit into their mold and all that. And maybe a bad MSP would actually want to do that. I think a good MSP really needs to learn and understand the business and its unique requirements.
And you could say that for both sources, though, Ben. You could say that for an internal IT as well. They're comfortable. They don't want to push the mold. They don't need to keep the business because they've got a job. That's
right. I think that's the other thing as well. I mean, that's it's the other flip side of the argument.
The individuals, it's hard to pinpoint whether one's better or the other. Like it really does come down to what the business requires, and in some situations, in-house IT would be better than MSP. It may end up being cheaper and work just effectively.
I think you're right. I think there'll be some circumstances where, I mean, again, there's like a, how do I explain it? There's like a happy sort of medium, but I mean, I think from my experience, and certainly what I've seen is that what does work best is maybe when you've got someone there who can do a little bit of internal IT as maybe sort of like your level one kind of guy, right? So you've got someone there that can do the day-to-day, restart the computers, do whatever they need to do, or help people with their day-to-day issues, and then when they get stuck or they need to look at projects or they've got other bigger things that they need to sort of try and figure out, they get the managed IT guys in there, they get their MSP in there, and they go through the processes and basically help them with the broader IT strategy and the bigger picture. That's where the outsourced or the MSP comes in, and that allows them to get the best of both worlds, where you're not paying someone for helping Jenny restart her computer for the 100th time today or stupid stuff like that. You're allowing your internal IT guy to do all the basic stuff, and then when you need to get someone in there to do some of the more complicated bits and pieces, or maybe some of the stuff that not necessarily even more complicated but requires a varied skill set that maybe again they haven't necessarily been exposed to. Again, the managed approach works perfectly with that. So you can do a really nice hybrid approach there. And as you said, it's all about personalities, right? If everyone's on the same page, you can have a really great, strong, cohesive team that, whether it's internal, external, or a combination of both, that'll do a fantastic job. And, it is really about, literally everyone being on the same page and wanting to work together. And again, there are certain advantages that, again, an MSP, someone might argue, and it depends on the actual provider, right? Some might be profit driven, but a lot of them want to retain their customers for the long term. And the best way to do that is to demonstrate value. The best way is to find somewhere where we can save some money or generate some income or do something. You do that for a business, and they'll be a client with you for life. So, the process should always be, really about trying to find that business case and that value in the technology and really adding on to that. And look, whether you're I know, and maybe, look, and again, there may be less motivation for an internal IT person to do that because they know they've got a job. They know they literally can't be chopped off on a whim. So there's probably maybe a little less motivation there.
Unless something is essential, you might find internal IT might stagnate a little bit. They won't have new ideas and things, especially if they're risky, because if there's any level of risk, an internal IT staff member is likely going to go, well, this is going to take too much time. I'd rather sit at my desk and not have to answer if something goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's an important point as well, because again, there may be different levels of risk, I guess, risk acceptance for internal versus external. So, but as I said, look, it's not necessarily a case of either or. I feel like both work well in a good model. I think a hybrid approach is probably the best approach. But let's just get into a couple of the other points, because I know that we've sort of spoken at length really on that point, and it does really go to the key point of basically, the internal versus external model. But let's talk about a couple others real quick.
Yeah, so here's one that I definitely feel that we've all experienced is its availability. So this sort of weighs on the buyer side of going towards an MSP, but let's say your internal IT, especially if it's only a one-man band or one or two staff members, is if they're not available. So what if one has a holiday and the other one's sick? Or if it's only one person, what if they're sick or away? You're putting your business efficiency at risk. If something goes wrong, you've got no access to IT services. It could be the CEO's computer during a meeting or something that could be very important. And if something goes wrong and, oh, sorry, my IT guys in Vanuatu for 3 weeks, then, what are you going to do?
Right now, he isn't. And if he's in Vanuatu now, we won't come back in 3 weeks.
Maybe he's watching Vanuatu videos on YouTube or something. But that's where an MSP, you're not going to have the issues with availability. Generally, with your MSPs, if there is an urgent issues, most MSPs have times that they have to minimum response times.
SLA, so service level agreement. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And some MSPs may even offer 24-hour urgent response times, and someone might be available pretty much any time of the day to look at urgent issues. So there is that pro towards MSP, is that you don't have to worry about the availability of them.
Yeah, it is. Look, and I certainly, and again, I was going back to trying to find that ideal sweet spot, right? Like, if you look at, say, like if you're spending, say, $50,000 a year on a managed service provider, it's probably still better value than getting someone on board for $50,000 a year at that point, because, again, you're getting a team versus an individual. And you're getting a service level agreements versus, again, whatever hours that individual is contracted to work. So you're still getting better value at that point. I think it's where maybe if you've got a budget of, I don't know, a couple $100,000 a year for your IT, I think at that point, that's when you're going to want to start to look at going, okay, let's get maybe some internal IT, maybe let's get a little bit of external IT to help out with some certain projects or maintain more complex systems, and try and get that balance. But I think really, if you're spending really anywhere between, I guess 5 and 100, literally 5,000 to 100,000, you're going to be better off with an MSP. Obviously, for $5,000 a year, you're not going to be able to hire anyone of any capability.
Maybe a casual.
Maybe
two hours a week
from McDonald's or something that might be able to. I don't know. They might know how to turn a computer on for you occasionally or something. I'm not sure, but you certainly, that's one of those key questions. And so, but I think again, what we're seeing, certainly from our experience, if you've got someone there who maybe is in admin, who's a little bit cluey, you can reboot a computer occasionally or do some little bit of basic stuff. That can get you out of trouble for some of you. Just really simple day to day. My keyboard's not working. I'll unplug it, plug it back in again. Stuff like that, right?
There's a point, then when you start to get there, Ben, sorry to interrupt. There's a point I have there, especially with if you do go with, say, a local MSP who's working on site with staff members, you might be able to identify a sort of a champion staff member that could liaise with the MSP to have some of that kind of training and maybe just a little bit of a guideline or some cheat sheets on how to do some of that really basic stuff, and then how to escalate that to the MSP. Making sure things are plugged in and turned on and stuff like that before going and contacting the MSP can be a great way of not only having an MSP, but combining both worlds. You may not need to employ an IT person specifically as well as an MSP, but you could train a particular staff member that's there majority of the time to know some of this basic stuff.
Exactly. And again, that's going to that hybrid approach. So it's just a question of basically whether you have someone who's basically, admin experience with a little bit of understanding that they can do some of those basic things, or whether, again, depending on once you start to get to spending $100,000 plus a year on IT, you might go, okay, let's get, maybe let's get someone there part-time or something, or and then let's maybe get the MSP to do some bits and pieces, or whatever it might be. And I think once you're starting to hit about $200,000 a year, you probably want to start to get at least maybe have one IT guy there on site potentially. And again, look, not in saying that, look, it's not to criticize either approach, right? Like there are businesses out there easily can spend $1 million a year on IT that do not have internal IT, but have a very integrated managed service provider. Because the thing as well is with your managed service provider, a lot of them offer what's called VCIO services, which is a virtual CIO, virtual chief information officer service. So effectively, you could have your own little head of IT as a service, as part of the managed service provider model. So
you'll find the bigger the business, the more chances of that actually happening. Some major big organizations in Australia have that exact approach, as well as some federal government in Australia. Federal government in Australia relies on their own IT, but they do have a lot of managed service agreements and that with outsourced IT.
Yeah, you're exactly right. A lot of the government-based approaches, they will have both internal and they'll have external. That they need both resources, right? Like literally, and I think that's the thing is, once you start to get even beyond some of that even larger scale, that's when you need to get both internal and external on, because it's just the amount of resource required. You just can't manage it both internally and externally. You've got to get both, substantial resources on board really to make that happen. So it's funny. You sort of go the lower end, you have to have your service provider, you outsource it. You get to maybe sort of a mid-high end, we can get maybe a couple of internal and get some external potentially, or go all internal or external. You get to a really high end where you can go, all internal or maybe all external. And once you get to the very top end, you'll have both internal and external again. And I think it's a bit funny how that kind of works, but that's sort of the nature of the structure, and I guess again it's just basically it's an evolution of trying to get the best outcomes, and that's just the way it's typically evolved in both enterprise and in both government levels as well. Just quickly, some of the other things we just want to go over. So one of the other things that we've talked about, or we haven't talked about, but let's touch on now, is about the predictability of costs. So generally, with a managed service provider, again, like Club IT, you've got basically a set monthly fee for managing the systems and network, and that gives you a predictability in your costs, and that's obviously a big benefit. In saying that, you could argue, again, with your internal IT and your wages, you do get a reasonably predictable cost with that as well. And you also get strategic planning. So depending on, again, this goes back to that sweet spot, right? If you've got one internal IT guy working for you, can't expect them to practically manage the strategic side of the IT business, or the IT side of the business. So, you do need, if you want to look at it a little bit more strategically, I feel like having a managed service provider, having someone to manage your IT and outsource that, I feel like that is kind of required if you want to have a more of a strategic approach. Some may disagree with me there, but honestly, if you're one guy in a department, you're going to be chasing your tail 99% of the time, just trying to get things fixed and trying to manage what's there, let alone set up budgets and look at it, develop roadmaps and understand really what the next requirements are moving forward. So, I feel like that's one of the, the other key discussion points. So, what else have you got, Sam?
Yeah, so, like you said, it just comes down to predictable cost, scalability, access to best practice. We did touch on that before, was, we understand, or, managed service providers might understand across very different sites. So we can put together some of the best solutions for that business fit. A single IT may have only used one type of booking software, or let's say a payroll or something along those lines, or a people type software. So a managed service provider is probably going to have experience in a lot more. So they're at least going to know what's going to be better or worse or best fit for your business. So that can be also one of those things you might want to look at with having both, having different people.
That's right. I mean, from my experience, you'll generally find with internal IT environment, they'll know other products simply because of the previous place they worked at. But beyond that, they're not going to have much experience with other parts or other options in terms of payroll systems or whatever it might be. It might be membership systems or whatever. They're going to be limited in their experience and exposure to other systems, so they have less context in comparing those solutions and identifying maybe something that might work. And look, you may end up having, for example, you might bring in an external IT just for those types of projects, right? So you might go, right, we're going to look at upgrading our membership system. Let's bring an external IT to do a project on that, and look at the options and do the assessment and do all those bits and pieces, and that's totally fine. And that's again going back to that whole thing where we're saying, look, there's not necessarily a right or wrong approach. It's about having ideally, I think the best solution is always the best of both worlds where you can within the resources that you have. Just on the scalability one, it's an important point because it's very easy to upgrade and downgrade when you've got an external provider. Whereas if you've got a bunch of staff, if you've got maybe 5 IT staff, and you go, okay, well, our business has dropped 20%. Although I know that actually the Fair Work laws have changed a little bit in this current climate, but it's saying that you just can't drop and pick up staff at a whim, right? There's a massive training process, and then also there's a process for termination, all those things. You can't just go, we don't want you anymore, see you later, out the door. There's processes in place for human resources and for good reason as well. So scalability, if you're growing or you're expanding or maybe you're not sure about what's going to happen in the next 12 or 24 months, really a managed service provider is going to be a better option. Having outsourcing your IT will give you that flexibility, whereas if you hire a whole bunch of people, it's not as flexible to chop and change. You could end up in all kinds of problems. So certainly I'd say scalability, I'd say that probably does heavily favour the outsource side of it on that argument, just because of the fact that it's a contract versus basically a physical employment. So that's going to be a very different set of circumstances. And that
you also don't want to be known as the business who sacks people just as they need people, and
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, honestly,
you don't want to be the turnover business.
The turnover, man. Yeah.
And everyone talks about how many staff they go through. Like it's just not necessary. So having one IT person plus a MSP that you can go, all right, like in such as a current climate like COVID, you could go and talk to your MSP and come up with some kind of plan that you could scale back and save some money now, but then when everything's in full swing, say next year in 2021, then you could go back to your full platform with your MSP. So it's just one of those things where like you don't want to have to stand people down.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to have a reputation of being the business with all the staff turnover. There's a lot. I mean, if a business gets a rep of having substantial staff turnover, it's normally a massive turnoff. Even if you're even if you're someone desperate for work, if you see they keep turning over the staff every 12 months, it's not a good sign.
Especially if you just go on Seek and you see there's business reviews on seek.com.au now if you look for a job. So you can, I mean, I'm sure it's got a lot of slagging and that and some defamation cases, but if you go looking for a job and you see there's only 2 stars and you read through reviews and you're like, that sort of stuff, you're less likely to apply for a job, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I said, even if you're desperate for work, I don't think many people. I mean, no one wants to go through all the effort of getting employed in a job to be gone 6 months later and to go through hell in between. Like, no one wants to do that, right? If you're going to commit to something, you want to know that it's going to be a stable environment, and that it's going to be something that you're not going to be, shoved out the door 6 months later. So certainly. Scalability, if you do need the flexibility, I would recommend looking at basically external IT rather than hiring and firing every 12 months. It's not going to be a sustainable strategy, particularly in particularly in regional areas, you can't really do that for very long until the business suffers as a result. So, yeah, anything else you've got there, Sam? Any other ideas or anything you want to talk
No,
about?
I think we've pretty much covered everything off. You can almost go into concluding here that we're obviously going to be a little bit biased on the fact that we as Club IT we are an MSP, but we do understand both sides of it, and we do support as much as possible in business decisions. So, when you look at an MSP, they've got the scalability. It's usually lower costs. They're provided expertise. A wide array of support offered by an MSP is often a lot higher than internal IT, and is usually the best choice for all businesses, just depending on how much you want to commit to that sort of both approach.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, as we've said, I mean, unless you're spending probably at least a couple $100,000 a year, that's when you maybe would want to start to look at, again, the balance of internal and external there. But honestly, for the vast majority of businesses, the 1 million odd small businesses in Australia, an outsourced approach through someone like a managed service provider like Club IT is going to be your best bet. But in saying that, as I said, like there are different models and different ways to do different things, and not all businesses are the same. And certainly you can make both work. It really is about having the right attitude and the right approach to IT. And, you can get someone in there internally that's going to be great and that can do all kinds of different things, that might be a bit of a jack of all trades, that might be happy to answer the calls late at night and do whatever. And certainly, there is, that does happen. And, maybe you might pick up someone like that, if you're lucky on a cheap price, but again, that's not going to be a sustainable thing. But certainly there are those types of opportunities, and but I think from my experience, and certainly from again what you've talked about this morning, I feel like the best approach really is that hybrid approach. And if you're typical sort of small to medium enterprise, the best way to do it is, again, if you've got someone who's maybe got some admin experience, a little bit cluey. You can get, and look, most managed service providers, certainly like us, we're more than happy to train someone up to handle some of those basic bits and pieces, right? So, you get someone in there that's maybe got a little bit of admin experience, but they can do a little bit of enough of IT to sort of make your life easy day to day. But then you bring in your external resource to then, look at the bigger picture, help with the strategy, and really and also the cybersecurity as well. We can't stress enough the cybersecurity. That's going to be a massive issue these days. And there's no way that, unless you're spending really big bucks, there's no way that you can practically manage cybersecurity with a one-man IT team. It's just not going to happen.
Not unless they're a magician and they have spent years and years and years working in some kind of cybersecurity role. And even then, if you're looking at that, you're probably looking at spending a lot more money on that employee than you probably need to.
Exactly. Oh, look, it's not going to happen. I mean, the reality of it is now, even managed service providers, with the resources that we have, we're still trying to figure out some of the best ways to manage cybersecurity, and it's such a drastically evolving threat. The amount of resources that we're putting into it at the moment is quite substantial, and I couldn't foresee an individual company, if they can afford maybe even one internal IT staff member, they're just not going to have the resources again as well to put it into cybersecurity. So I'd probably say that if we talk about the current COVID climate model, inverted commas, the best option is really going to be, even if you've got the resources for internal IT, you probably still want to get your cybersecurity outsourced as well, just to make sure that stuff is tightened up. Because we've seen, we've talked about it over the last few weeks. We've talked about some very large companies with, no doubt substantial internal IT teams that are getting crushed by cybersecurity at the moment. So it's, I feel like that, again, the hybrid model is ultimately the best approach. You want to have staff, both internal, and you want to have a provider that also aligns with your values as well. So getting staff and your managed service provider on the right page, I think, is really important. And then, with the cybersecurity stuff, I'd probably still, even if you had someone who was a bit cluey internally, I would probably still get that done externally, just for the mere fact that it's evolving so massively at the moment. And you're going to need a lot of money and a lot of investment in a whole range of tools to completely secure your environment from a cybersecurity standpoint. So I think that covers it. I mean, that's really internal versus
Yeah.
external. We didn't really necessarily say one is better than the other, and I guess hopefully no one really got that. Was hoping for an answer on that. If you're hoping for an answer, should I go internal or external? I feel like we've given some good guidance on that, but there's no one or the other approach, right? So it's about.
I think it comes down to a lot of research. So if you're looking for an MSP, do some research. Look for someone who's local, someone who's got expertise in your particular field. Look for training and certifications, and same goes if you're looking at internal hiring. You just got to do your research, know what you're looking for, what kind of business they've worked in before. You might, if you're working in the clubs, you don't want to hire someone that's only worked in healthcare. You might want to try and find someone around that. So it just comes down to depends what you want, what you're looking for, and do the research.
Do your research, and again, be clear about upfront about what you're trying to achieve. And I think once you get your understanding of what your objectives are, and maybe what some of your key issues are with your organization, you'll be able to map out a strategy of what combination of internal resources versus external resources and how you manage that. So that's internal versus external. I'm Ben.
And I'm Sam.
And we'll see you guys on Friday for the Friday wrap. Take care. Catch you.